You know this freaky pointy thing known as the Apex Headcarve? Today, we're documenting the prototype. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Volutes have been part of Gibson's history on Les Pauls at least since the year 1969. It lasted until approximately 1982, and since then has really only shown up again on special limited edition reissues, and has never been a mainstay feature. On a Les Paul, that is. There's other models that still used them, but we're not here to talk about those today. But in 2017, the Gibson Custom Shop wanted to change all that. And we've actually already seen one of these things on the show in an old Rock or Not episode, but when the second prototype showed up, I knew I needed to document this on the show because it's such a crazy looking Les Paul. A nice dark finish, weird bridge system, still two humbuckers, and then we get to our headstock here. Nothing too crazy on the front, but then the back gets a little bit explicit. It's just like a weird middle finger-like design, and this is prototype number 2. But before we go too in-depth with this thing, we need to learn about the history of the Les Paul Custom Shop Modern, because it's different from the Gibson USA Modern. Those weren't introduced until 2019, and they are a different thing. The Gibson Custom Shop Modern Les Paul Standard was something that was introduced for the 2017 model year lineup. They featured chambered bodies, the then new Apex Headcarve, Birchbucker 2 and 3 pickups, and many cool colors, with most of them being translucent finishes with trans black, blue, green, red, purple, and amber. But there was one solid finish called Pearl Coral. They made 100 of each of those colors and they retailed at $3,999. Honestly, most people don't remember the Custom Shop Modern Les Paul Standard. And prior to today, I thought the Rhino Les Paul Custom was the first guitar to introduce the Apex Headcarve. It still might be because these were both birthed in the exact same year. I'm not really sure which model came first necessarily within the model year, but it might be that after they refined this design, they're like, hey, that looks like a Rhino horn, let's do a Rhino custom. The Rhino is way more memorable. But you'll notice from all those specs of the Custom Shop Modern that I just shared with you, there's nothing necessarily that exciting about it. Whereas this has a lot of stuff going for it. It's a very unique finish for that time frame, a brand new bridge style that we'll really have to take a look at on the workbench. Kind of reminds me of the Leo Kwan design, which is an intonatable wrap tail all built into one system. Apparently these were deemed too expensive to manufacture. That's the reason why we just got stuck with the regular stuff. I'm really surprised we didn't get the Access heel swoop back here, but all that stuff was fairly new. They didn't really know what to put it on, although it seems just silly not to have it on this model when they're trying out this new Volute. So far, this is the second prototype to show up, so maybe there's only 2, maybe another one will show up in a couple of years. But usually the story with these prototypes in this era coming out to light is an employee got it as part of a sale and can't sell it for X amount of years, or maybe they just want to keep it longer. I don't actually have a formal COA, but we do have this booklet, and do you see that? Matthew Kline's Neck Les Paul. That's actually the guy that designed the Apex Headcarve, even though it looks very similar to Martin's Volute style. So to learn more about this one, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench to take an in-depth look at all these specs and how it was made. Let's see how modern this modern prototype is. For our pickups, is it different from the production run? They are. You've got a standard 490R in the neck and a 498T in the bridge. Definitely not very modern of them. They've been using those pickups since the early 90s, but you know, whatever. Put those readings within the circuit, 13.27 k ohms in our bridge position, neck 7.68, and for fun, the middle at 4.86. And as far as the neck tenon, they are utilizing a long one. We don't have any special markings or anything, so nothing too incredibly groundbreaking in here. But now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this weird bridge design. So the post within the body looks like this. The very top of it actually has an Allen key adjustment, which will help you raise and lower the action. But then it has this little thing on top that screws over it to make it look like a normal post within a body. So it kind of reminds me of some of PRS's locking features on other guitars. So as far as setting this thing up, you actually need to make your adjustments before you put those caps on, because that's just what locks it into place to give you that nice finished look. What's kind of interesting here is you still have set screws, very similar to how you intonate a normal wraparound tailpiece. I'm not quite sure why those are there because we actually have intonatable saddles on this thing. The only thing I think those could be for is if you ran out of intonation room, you could potentially lower your bridge or raise it depending on which way you need to go. But it might just be that those are there just to help secure it to the post. But I was always curious why this area is so big. Before today, we've never seen the backside of it. So the whole reason that they decided to design this is it uses brass. You're in contact with brass all the time, and that's supposed to give you better sustain. So your whole saddle system is actually quite extensive underneath it. But the strings go straight into those brass saddles, and then you adjust those saddles using a hex wrench. But what I find incredibly funny for this prototype is the fact they didn't even bother to notch the saddles. That's funny. So yeah, kind of an interesting design. Do you think this would have worked in production? I'm not sure if modern Les Paul players would have liked it or not. However, it was something different. It's cool to see him try. But again, ultimately this was deemed too expensive to manufacture. So that probably means it's not worth our investment to make all these things if people aren't going to openly accept them. I think it's insanely cool left in prototype status. You will notice that the toggle switch does not have a poker chip around it. So yeah, that's pretty modern. But you've just got your regular two-piece flame maple top on here with your nice vermilion burst finish. The other one was more of a bangle burst. I think I preferred this one. But we do not have a pick guard stock from the factory. And it's just 2 individual volumes and tone controls for each pickup. And I'm not sure about the weight relief status on this, because an official spec sheet doesn't quite exist. But we've got a mahogany neck with a rosewood fretboard. Looks like 22 medium jumbo style frets with your acrylic inlays, so nothing too groundbreaking over here. But I'm curious about our scale length. Call me crazy, I had a hunch that they might play with it on this guitar, and they did. It's a 25-inch scale length, so about a 1/4 inch longer than a regular Les Paul. And I could be wrong here, but I measure closest to a 10-inch fretboard radius. So okay, maybe that's where the whole modern-esque features came from. That's why I like documenting these prototypes in person, because you just never know what you're going to find on these. Before we measure the nut, I noticed there's some strange black marking right there on the edge. Just kind of shows you that this was a prototype. Not all cleaned up for public sale, but the nut measures 1.7 inches. That increases to 2.07 by the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.9 and 1 inches by the 12th. Here's that profile at the 1st and 12th fret, just a nice rounded 50s neck. It doesn't feel like an asymmetrical neck or anything, just your standard rounded C. As far as our headstock, they did not call it a Les Paul technically, because there's no silkscreen up here, but you still have your Gibson mother of pearl logo. And for whatever reason, non-locking tuners seems kind of silly on a modern guitar to not have them. But our truss rod's in great shape, and it's just a regular truss rod cover. Moving on to the backside, let's look at our control cavity. Things look pretty basic down here with Gibson branded pots. All your standard wiring, you don't have bumblebees or anything historic spec'd. And then our toggle switch is pretty basic. But we do get kind of a cool backplate over here that reads Gibson Custom. It sits slightly proud over top of it. It's kind of like a gel sticker, kind of gummy in feel. But we've got the output jack on the edge, strap button on the bottom, and in our other usual location. Oddly enough, it has the thin binding in the cutaway, a historic spec. Wouldn't surprise me if they just put an R9's body on here, because it does have the shelf to put the stamp on there, it's just not stamped. And then our neck, nice and chunky, but we really need to take a look at how this volute is created. In case you're not familiar, the whole purpose of a volute is to help solve the issue that Gibsons have. They have this angled back headstock so they don't have to use string trees. But that also creates a weak point right here if somebody were to drop their guitar. One way to counteract that is by putting a volute just to add more wood in this area, so should it experience trauma, it might not break. So here's a Norland era style volute. Now that's a particularly big example. You can look at a normal one from like a Les Paul Custom. But you can see this one, instead of just having a big lump back here, they tried to make the neck look as seamless as possible. You really don't notice too much difference while you're playing this until you really start to see the way the light reflects off of it. So what happens is they've kind of bulked up the side area on top of it on both edges in multiple ways. So they basically just left a lot of wood right here, then sculpted away right here just to make it look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, and then they formed this middle finger shape. But you can see just how much wood they left proud on top of that. But that sculpts away an area for your tuners over here. I can definitely tell why these didn't make it into production. They just don't look all that stylistically pleasing. But again, as a prototype, it's really interesting. What they ultimately came up with here with the Apex Headcarve, it honestly doesn't look as strong. So it looks like they sacrificed some structure in order for the cosmetics to look good. Because hey, the Apex Headcarve is really sweet in my opinion. It's really strange the first time you see it, but if people like a similar thing on Martins, they were hoping that other people would like them here. Now, in my old video about the prototype, I said that guitar's value really depends on how much they use this Apex Headcarve, and now we do know they've continued to use them on the Access Les Paul Custom and even some of the standards. So it does seem to be something that the Gibson Custom Shop is going to continue to use, so that's why I was excited to pick up the prototype here. I'm kind of on the fence about keeping it because I think it looks great next to the Rhino because it's just such a cool, quirky design. You know what's interesting? How would they do the serial number if they had did that? Were they planning on doing them all stamped vertically like that? Perhaps that's another reason they decided to go with this design, so they wouldn't have to change all that up, because the Apex headcarve ends before the serial number station. With this thing all strung up, I don't know if it's a placebo effect, but this particular guitar does seem to last a little bit longer in the sustain department, and has a little bit more of an acoustic quality to it. So it could just be that this is a particularly good guitar because they just all vary. But maybe they were onto something here. All said and done, this one weighs 9 pounds, 6 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this beauty sounds. That bridge pickup has a really nice, nasty growl to it. If that's not your style, you could always lower your pickup a little bit, but I kind of like it. It's nice and aggressive. So far, I'd say I like it. It's really clean and articulate. Now that we know all about the custom shop Les Paul Modern Prototype, what are my final thoughts on this thing? It might just have something to do with this particular guitar, or maybe it does come down to this bridge. This thing has a lot of sustain. You heard it right there with that nice big open chord, and even the single notes, and playing it acoustically. It has a really nice acoustic tonal quality to it on top of all that. But had Gibson actually came out with this and put it on a whole entire model, I think they would have been met with a lot of backlash at first, just because of how different looking it is. But if it's on something that's called the Modern, I think people would be a little bit more open to trying it if it wasn't a crazy price. Had it had the Access heel carve on top of this nice fat chunky neck, I think that would have been a lot of fun. But you can check out the Contour 8 if you need to learn more about a guitar similar to that. I'm curious if Slash happened to see this when he was touring the Gibson factory and been like, yeah, I want my next signature to be in that color, because it's around this time where you start to see the Bolivian burst get created. That didn't end up actually being a custom shop run. It's what eventually turned into the Vermilion Gibson USAs, and we have yet to see the custom shop release. But I like this nice dark burst color. It's awesome. All right, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.